There you go. Right. So our next speaker for today is Frederick Desmond Yu. Fred currently works for the banter.Our Foundation Incorporated as a Mind Museum's resident chemist. As an educator, he's always trying to make science safe and exciting for everyone. Apart from designing and facilitating SciComm programs with other mind movers, he also manages chemical wastes and operates a small composting system. On his days off, he is a happy home cook, chemistry consultant, and sleepaholic. His favorite topics include food and agricultural science, amateur chemistry, and all kinds of invertebrates. Before the enhanced community quarantine in the Philippines, his most recent obsession was learning how to grow edible mushrooms. He has a bit of excitedly extending conversation, but he's working on it. Today, Fred will talk about how he communicates science in public spaces. Fred, are you here already?
I'm here already.
Right. Can you try sharing your screen, please?
Let's give this a try and see if I can.
Okay.
Oh, looks like I can, but
right.
Before I do, I actually wanted to do a bit of a science demonstration for you guys, if it's okay, because this is, after all, a public space, a digital public space. So yeah, I might ask you guys some questions while I'm doing this demonstration. Don't worry, you may answer them in the comments. Go for it. So anyway, let's try this out. Right now, I've got this bottle of water. It's about 60 or 70% full. It's kind of a good representation of what our bodies are, because our bodies are 60 or 70% water, right? And at any moment, your body is doing some very, very hard work to keep you alive. Unfortunately, sometimes this also means that you will produce some not very good stuff. And sometimes we also take in the not so very good stuff. You know, it tastes good after all. So in order to demonstrate that, I've got here a common household chemical, your povidone iodine, and I'm gonna add it to our water. One squeeze like that. All right. So our model right here of our body is now filthy. It's very, very dirty. Ang sobrang dumi ng tubig natin. And this is a very good way of illustrating how, you know, your body can build up all these not so very good stuff. But let's see if there's a way to fix that. I've got here a small powder. I'm actually going to spray it here if you can see it. It's a bit of a powder. It's known as ascorbic acid. You probably have this at home. It's also known by a common name, which I will reveal later on. And if I add this powder to our body model, what do you think would happen? You can write your guesses over there. Oh, right, somebody's already guessed it. Nice. Thank you so very much. All right, so I'm gonna add a little bit of this powder and we'll see if anything has happened. It looks like nothing has happened, but then that's because it was still initially entering the body. Let's see what happens if we spread it around, given some time. We'll speed it up with a little bit of shaking, okay? So we've got some dirty water. And then the water now is, let's give it a couple seconds. It's clear again, all right. So can somebody tell me what's happening over here? Yes, somebody says it's clear. Wonderful. So what's happening here actually is that ascorbic acid, also known as, and somebody said it in the comments, vitamin C is an antioxidant. So it's the sort of thing that stops the oxidants from attacking your body, the toxic material, the not so good stuff that you produce and the not so good stuff that you eat. Because of iodine here is a type of oxidant that's brown but turns clear once it already caused or has already oxidized something. We want the vitamin C to take the place of our body so that it can be flushed out of our system very easily. Now, normally, your body has its own set of antioxidants, right? But then sometimes it's always useful to get a couple extra from other sources. Usually we get this from the food we eat and sometimes from vitamin supplements. So what is our key takeaway here? Normally we can produce our own antioxidants, but it's always good to try to stay healthy and to take good food and eat your vitamins. So That's the end of the demonstration. You may ask questions also in the comments, and we'll move on to the rest of my presentation. Okay, can everybody see my screen? I cannot
Yes.
see the chat. Okay. Yes, thank you so very much. So, again, my name is Fred. You may call me Mind Mover Fred. I am a science communicator from the Philippines, and I happen to be the resident chemist from the Mind Museum. All right. Go to the next slide. Okay. So my presentation has 4 parts. Basically, I'll be talking about what it's like to be sciencing for the public, some of the walls that have to be climbed for people who want the science for the public, and why it's totally worth it. And then finally, I'll leave you guys with some tips and tricks, you know, to help you hit the ground running. Oh, so as for sciencing for the public, part of my role with the Mind Museum and as a science communicator has really been to engage the public in science. And that means preparing signages and write-ups for when I'm in the museum or for articles and other media, designing demonstrations, making sure that they are safe and that they are performed to the best safety that we can perform them in, and to do workshops and shows. If you actually see here, I've got a couple of them posted here on my on my screen. So it's really an experience of getting anyone and everyone involved with the sciences, because it's really great to see kids light up when they get to see a fossil for the first time, or when they tap a radish or kalabasa or something, and then matingin nila na may tunog pala because we've connected it to a network of Arduino or something. And it's also great to see adults look at their old how do you call this, their old games and activities, and then seeing it in a different way. For example, here, if you look to the left of the screen, I've actually made this game. It's called Take Me With You, and it's one of those things I used to teach people about recycling, but it's based off the game Pico. So kung nakalaro na kayo ng Pico, you could probably play this game and learn a little bit about recycling too. It's really an experience about building relationships and rapport with the audience and making sure that when they leave the place or when they leave, how do you call this, to go back to their lives or whatever, they feel more enriched by the science. They feel more empowered by the science in the everyday. Oh goodness. All right. So there will always be some walls to climb with regards to, how do you call this, science communication for the public. These are the challenges and limitations, but they can be overcome. First and foremost is, as I've observed, the uneven science capital. This does not mean that your audience is dumb. As Cami mentioned earlier, that is totally false. People are not stupid. It's really more of people have such a huge variety of science capital or science experiences. The collection of their science experience is so varied that when you're talking to this whole group of people in public, you have to try your best to make sure that you can address as many of these people as possible, that you can get to their level. And it often brings within itself its own problems, because if you leave someone out, you end up, how do you call this? You end up losing an audience who might have been able to be better inspired by the science, more interested in the science. You tend to ask yourself, how simple should it actually be? Not because you think that people can't experience these things, but because maybe you're talking from the perspective that doesn't account for them, and you should account for them. The nosebleed paradox is just another way of saying, when people think that scientists are way above them and that it's a nosebleed thing to try to analyze what they're saying, but it's not. It's always possible to talk about these things, and it's always going to be a challenge, but we have to climb it by going to meet them where they are. Other challenges and limitations include choosing materials, because you want to make sure they're always safe and accessible. Sometimes you can be lost in translation, especially in the public eye. I've had experiences where I've literally been lost in translation because my audience was all Korean. And there's always the arrow of time where you have to try to be time conscious. So these are just some of the challenges and limitations I faced as a science communicator talking in public. Oh, it seems I'm not very good at this PowerPoint thing. I apologize. But at the end of the day, all of these challenges, all of these sort of complications are really worth dealing with because honestly, science for the public is wonderful. It helps to provide a face-to-face interaction, which helps to humanize scientists and to empower all learners. Because scientists are not actually all about their science all the time. Scientists are still people, and we really do and we can create that communication with each other. As for empowering all learners, it also so happens that people can be enthusiasts, experts, and just everyday people. And if we do not actively pursue that communication with the public, we end up splitting away all of these different uh, labels further apart, and that's not that's not what science communication is about. Apart from that, science communication for the public is a safe space for dialogue, whether we want to believe it or not, whether there's a physical building. I know I'm very fortunate that I'm able to do this full time, but science communication for the public inevitably creates a science translation hub, not just for language, because there are so very many science communicators from very many places. They can meet them through language, but also through an intermingling of their disciplines, because we want to create, as public speakers about science, a cross, multi, and transdisciplinary approach. I'll leave you guys with a quote. It's actually from my colleague and very good friend, Krista De Silva. In communicating, we want to reach a common field of experience because dialogues are always key to better mutual understanding. So to close my presentation, I want to leave some tips to help you guys hit the ground running. First, do your RLL. I know scientists here are probably thinking it's a joke because of the RRL, but you got to do your RLL. Read, listen, and learn. So you should have that conversation. So talk to people, talk to anyone really. You should try to find science in everything. You should check out all the other disciplines, because just because you have a, let's say, master's degree in this or that, or a PhD in this or that, doesn't mean that you can't pick up some stuff from another discipline. Because at the end of the day, you want to make it relatable and to keep it relatable. Another kind of obvious, or I would say semi-obvious piece of advice would be to join an acting or public speaking workshop, because at the end of the day, you do end up being a public speaker. So you have to get over your fears of talking in public. And finally, don't take yourself too seriously, because really, for science to be for everyone, we have to start feeling like everyone. So if you're interested in following me, you can check me out on social media. You can follow my misadventures on IG as @infra.fred.u. And if you're also interested in some more science stuff and even arts programs from the Bonifacio Art Foundation, you can follow us on Facebook at the Mind Museum, where we actually have some science shows, experiments, and demonstrations online every Monday and Wednesday for the next coming weeks. It's called Mind at Home. If you're interested also in the arts, because really they're not that separate again, you can check out at BGC Art Center or at Arts at BGC. And our program, You Art Not Alone, for programs such as that. I want to thank you all so very much for letting me talk about science in public spaces. If you have any questions, you can send me them. That's about it. Thank you so much, Science Chat PH, for this opportunity.
Right. Thanks very much, Fred. Unfortunately, we kind of like had an overtime of it there, but I would just like to maybe ask one question. What tips do you have in engaging youth and adults in communicating science? And what are the differences and approaches that you do in engaging with youth and adults? Just very quickly.
Oh, okay. When I'm talking to much younger people, I would like to usually ask first how or like what their track is or what their field is, because it also helps me gauge what I can and cannot say. I'll usually look for what is the how do you call this? What is the how do you call it? What is the most distant from the rest of the group, and I'll try to incorporate that into how I share or explain the science, because you don't want to leave anyone behind.
Right. Thanks very much, Fred. And with that, I think we should move on to our next speaker. Let me just share the screen. Okay, so our next speaker is Renee Karunungan. Ayin is currently doing her PhD in social media and politics at Loughborough University in the UK. At the same time, she works as a science communicator focusing on digital communication at the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research. Ayin wrote a Filipino children's book entitled Where Did All the Fireflies Go? To instill love of the environment in children. She is a proud houseplant mom, and her favorite genus is the philodendron, which name literally means tree loving. For her talk, Ayin will share how we can communicate science through a children's book. Hi, Ayin, are you ready?
Yes, ready. Hello.
Yeah, okay. So can you share your screen?
Yes, before I share my screen though, so I'll introduce myself for a bit and show my book, the book that I wrote. So this is the children's book that I wrote, published by St. Matthew's Publishing under Kahel Press. It's called Where Did All the Fireflies Go? And these are in different independent bookshops as well as fully booked in the Philippines. So yeah, so I'm Jules introduced me a bit. I'm Renee or Ayin, and I'm now in the UK. I work as a science communicator for the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research. So I work with scientists mainly on working on climate change. So I work with physicists mostly, and also social scientists to communicate climate change. But now today I will talk about how we can communicate science to children through children's books. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes. Can you make it in a okay? Yeah, presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Awesome. So I'll start with this quote by Neil Gaiman, who is one of my favorite authors. He said, "Stories you read when you're the right age never quite leave you." And I don't know if everyone here is a reader, but I think when children read books, start reading books, even when they're young, even when they're toddlers, when parents read to them, these stories actually never quite leave us. So I remember one of my favorite books when I was young, probably 6 or 7, that I read was called Rainbow Fish. And Rainbow Fish is a fish with colorful rainbow scales. And I couldn't forget it because at the end of the story, Rainbow Fish shared her beautiful scales to every fish in the ocean, so that all of them were beautiful. So I think there is a power in telling stories. So why stories? No, why do we communicate through stories? So first, it's because we use stories to make sense of what's happening around us every day. This is why we tell stories to our friends, we tell stories to our families, we basically tell stories every day of our lives, and that's how we make sense of what's happening around us. We communicate events and experiences among people. And also, stories are likely to be richer, more compelling, more memorable than abstracted points we wish to convey to other people. So, when we talk about our feelings to our family or to our friends, we don't just say, "Oh, I'm sad" or "I'm happy." We tell them the story. Why are we happy? What happened? So that's the power of story. And why children's book? For me, we shape our children, and the way we shape them will dictate our future. And working on climate change and the environment, I think I'd want children to grow up with care for and love of nature. And children are naturally curious. They constantly ask questions and want to explore the world around them. And storybooks help convey the values, the beliefs, the attitudes, which shape a child's reality. The stories we hear as children shape the view of our world. So, and this has been studied, no, by different scholars on literature, on children's books. And for example, there's been a study on Harry Potter books, and they say that children who grew up on Harry Potter or reading Harry Potter actually grew up to have more empathy, and understood better, you know, what slavery meant or what discrimination meant, and grew up to be adults who actually fight for causes against discrimination and slavery. And you know, this is why we keep saying we learn through stories. Children learn through stories. We learn to behave, to think, to act through the characters we meet, through stories we read. We learn to develop a critical perspective about how to engage in social action, and it can influence how children choose to act in the world. So how do we write a science story for children? So first, we have to ask ourselves, what is our goal? What is the one thing that you want to achieve? So in writing my storybook, I asked myself, what do I want to achieve when children read my book? And for me, it was a message of we need to take care of our environment, of all creatures that we see here on Earth, no matter how small they are. And so that's why I wrote a story between a young boy and a firefly. You know, a firefly is so tiny, we rarely see them. But through the friendship of the boy and the firefly, we see how this boy gives importance to this very tiny insect that we usually, you know, take for granted. Next one is, what do you want to say? What is the message or the messages that you want to communicate to children? So for me, as I said, that was one earlier. Second was to communicate how important it is to preserve our environment, to take care of our environment, so that you know, other creatures, not just humans, can live peacefully in our Earth. And number three, we want to simplify. We want to use concepts or words that children can understand. No, use age-appropriate language. So when we talk about storybooks, there are different age-appropriate language, even age-appropriate number of words per page, depending on what age bracket you're targeting. So my storybook, I don't know if you can see the video above me holding my book. This is one of the pages, yeah, and it's bilingual, so it's in English and Filipino. And this kind of story picture book is for 8 to 9 years old, because there's quite a lot of words in a page, and basically a 2-year-old will not be able to understand this. So it again, depending on what your age bracket is, then you write your story accordingly. Number 4 is use metaphors. So if a concept is a little bit complicated, use other images or concepts that they are familiar with. So for example, when we talk about climate change, you know, we usually talk about carbon footprints, carbon emissions, greenhouse gases. You know, sometimes it's a little too complicated to fit that in a story. No, so we use metaphors. So in my case, in my children's book, I use the metaphor of polluted environment. That's why Ning Ning, the firefly, had to go. So I didn't have to go into detail about, you know, what is climate change, or what is carbon emission, what is greenhouse gases. You know, we have to use images that children can understand and that they already know. And so number 5, it's also important for children's books to have pictures. It's actually half of the story. So this is why publishers and children's book authors always have good illustrations to accompany the story, because children don't just rely on words. You know, as adults, we can read books that don't have pictures, but children need those pictures to be able to understand the story better. So if you want to write a children's book, make sure that you know someone or an illustrator, or you have pegs on what kind of illustration you would want to accompany your children's book. Yep. So again, this is my book, Where Did All the Fireflies Go? So a story about the friendship between a boy and a firefly hindered by the increasing pollution and environmental destruction in their city. If people want to know how I got to publish this, it's actually through networking. So I got to meet Wawi, who is one of the owners of St. Matthew's Publishing. And at the time when she was thinking of, maybe like 3 years ago, she was thinking of having a line of books for children that's about different advocacies. And because she knew that I was working on climate change and environmental issues back in the Philippines and around Asia, she then asked me if I wanted to write something for the environment for children. Yeah, and I think I will end with this quote from Matilda, Roald Dahl's book. So Matilda's strong young mind continued to grow, nurtured by the voices of all those authors who had sent their books into the world like ships on the sea. These books gave Matilda a hopeful and comforting message. You are not alone. And that's it. If you want to contact me, this is my Twitter, RJ Karunungan. I mostly tweet about all the science and political stuff there. That's also my Instagram handle, but on my Instagram, you will see nothing but food and plants. So follow at your own risk. I have a website, reneekarunungan.com. It's usually where I blog about actually climate change and science communications. And if you want to email me some questions or other things, it's renee.karunungan@gmail.com. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Ayin. And I think we can accommodate like 1 to 2 questions. I understand there's a lot of questions, but we can only have 1 or 2 right now. So I would like to ask a question by on what was the process involved when you wrote your book, and how did you start it, and were you able to incorporate some cultural elements in it?
Yes. So how did I start it? For me, it was the concept. No, I wanted to think to I had to think, what is the main message that I wanted to say and how can I best say it? So for me, it was, how can I inculcate children's love for the environment? And I thought the friendship between a boy and, a firefly, or it could have been not a firefly or something else, but I like fireflies, no? Is something that's quite emotional. You get quite emotionally attached to the characters and you see yourself as the boy or as the firefly, and that emotional bond, no, in the story, they kind of had to separate ways because the firefly couldn't live anymore in the city where the boy was because it was getting too dirty. And I knew that kind of story would get kids to have more emotional investment. So that was the first step. And then the second step was finding an illustrator who could best illustrate what I wanted for kids to see in the book. And it was good because I had a network of artists as well who are my friends. And one of them, was able to illustrate what I wanted. And then, of course, submitting it to the publisher. No, we all work together, me, the publisher, the illustrator, on editing the illustration and the story. So I think I think from start to end, it was around 6 months of work, just continuously editing and trying to make the book a little bit better.
All right, thanks very much, Ayan. And one more question: how would you encourage science-inclined student writers to go beyond their scientific bubble? Just very quickly.
Sorry again?
Yeah, how do you encourage, how do you encourage science-inclined student writers to go beyond their scientific bubble?
It's difficult because I work with scientists who are the best in their field, and it's difficult for someone to go out of their bubble and because it's outside of their comfort zone. I think we need to, if these are students, no, or if you're a teacher, maybe encourage them to think more creatively, maybe encourage them to have projects, no, that encourage science communication. So I remember, I think when I was in high school, um, our science teacher would encourage us not just to write, for example, a research paper, but to present a project that's in a way more creative. So for example, we had to do some school plays or some dance or some sort of, I know it's kind of weird, but or some sort of more creative ways to present our science. So I think going out of your bubble is definitely um, difficult, but I think with encouragement from teachers and other people, it's possible for people to be encouraged.
Okay, thanks very much, Renee, and I hope everyone will buy your book. I think a lot of people are interested.